Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Drago. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a new member to City Congregation. And while I'm not necessarily new to Judaism, Judaism is in many ways new to me. In fact, this is actually my first time celebrating the high holidays. When I set out to write this, I kept thinking I would relate new beginnings to my experience as a nurse in New York City. My plan was to keep it simple. I'd relate it to the pandemic, throw in some keywords like reflection and atonement, and wrap it up with something inspiring and hopefully call it a day. In hindsight, it should have been little surprise that I struggled for weeks trying to put my thoughts down. It got to the point that I started bringing my laptop with me to work just so I can continue to stare at the blank screen at the hospital library on my lunch breaks as well. Now, something to keep in mind is that the HR department at my hospital has really leaned into the ethos of the new normal. It fills subject line after subject line in my inbox at work and the topic of near daily conversation in our live streams. During one procrastination session while checking my email at work, I found myself repeating new normal instead of new beginnings. And honestly, I started to get mad, but like really mad. In the face of a global pandemic, accelerating climate change, unrelenting attacks against voting rights, and now the passage of SB 8 in Texas, what about anything in the last year and a half has felt normal? What if I don't like this new normal? I never agreed to this new normal. New beginnings, a new normal. They sound similar enough, but the phrases are really in direct opposition to each other, aren't they? Normal implies consistency, routine, standardization, predictability, and according to Merriam-Webster, generally free of physical or mental impairment or dysfunction exhibited or marked by healthy or sound functioning. Well, I have to tell you that sitting there in the library in my wrinkled scrubs, my cheeks and nose still tingling from the pressure of an N95 mask, I did not feel as though myself or most people in my life would currently describe themselves as functioning soundly. The only thing normal about new beginnings is that they happen to all of us without exception. The passing of a loved one, divorce, or the loss of a job can all herald new beginnings, although arguably not necessarily a welcomed or chosen one. In the same breath, the birth of a child, a new job, marriage, or retirement are all new beginnings that would be cause for celebration. The only thing we control regarding new beginnings is how we respond to them. So as you've probably gathered by now, I really struggled while attempting to write this. I cried nearly every time I got to this part, and for weeks, I didn't even know why. I mentioned that I'm new to Judaism, and I'll get to that, but I have to tell you that if you are looking to experience a crash course in Jewish guilt, dodging emails from your new rabbi and adding in business days when tomorrow falls on a Friday, all while continuing to stare at a screen, flashing cursor late into the night, is a truly effective method. Jewish humor too, got it, cool. For me, this year has been harder than the last. Like most of you, I just focused on getting through the day, one day to the next, and I haven't had much time to consider fallout from the previous year, to really sit within the collective trauma that we've all experienced. Now, obviously, there have been some real moments of joy, like the election results and the development of a vaccine, but those moments have felt few and far between amidst a lot of the chaos and the monotony of the last year and a half. It's been hard to remain present this year when so much of it just feels like an extension of 2020, and I keep waiting for things to calm down and to feel normal again. The simple truth is that it's hard to admit to yourself that you're not happy, or that you're struggling, or that you're exhausted. It's really hard to write those words, and it's even harder to say them out loud. One new beginning that has brought me a lot of joy, though, has been exploring the role Humanistic Judaism has in my life. I've always identified as Jewish, but outside of my mother, my only living familial connection to Judaism was my observant Orthodox grandmother who passed away when I was 8. My mother had converted to Catholicism years earlier, and my sister and I were raised with my father's faith since we have a larger extended family on that side. Despite this, Judaism was still a part of my upbringing. As a child, when I was upset, I would crawl into my mother's lap to lay kepi as she rubbed my back. And I have loved tchotchkes since I have had the dexterity to hold things in my hands, which coincidentally I use a lot when speaking as well. I was in 3rd grade when I first read David Adler's Remember the Holocaust, which led to Eli Wiesel's in high school, which led to Literature of the Holocaust courses in college. I've shuffled through items in the attic and found passports from relatives who immigrated to America, presumably to escape pogroms. I remember the anger and sadness I felt on behalf of a great uncle when I learned he'd felt forced to change his name from Horowitz to Howard to avoid discrimination at work. And as a child, I knew that my grandmother's boyfriend had a tattoo on his forearm that we weren't supposed to ask about. But it would be a few more years before I understood what they were. And only until I understood that never again means never again, that I understood what they represented. And so even though I wasn't raised Jewish, my family history and experiences of Jewish people have always informed my views on justice. I found ways to honor those who came before me by volunteering in the community and various activist organizations, and I've done my best to speak out loudly against injustice, corruption, state-sanctioned violence, and advocate for the oppressed and marginalized. One of the most important lessons I was taught this year is that joy can also be an act of resistance. Up until recently, so much of my connection and understanding of the Jewish experience was rooted in trauma, and certainly pride in survival. But I knew very little of what it meant to celebrate Judaism and Jewish culture and to participate in Jewish life. Since I've never been able to accept the doctrine and dogma of organized religion, I just accepted that there was no way I could practice Judaism that met my values. But surely, amongst all the rallies and events I had attended, I was sure that there had to be other people like me out there. So one day I Googled, most secular form of Judaism, New York City. And there was City Congregation, third from the top. I clicked on a video and there was an interfaith couple and a guy with a sleeve of tattoos, and I was like, well, that's a place for me. It took over 3 decades, but I finally found a community to learn from and grow in. How many of us get to choose our beliefs? I feel so very fortunate to be a member, but City Congregation didn't find me. I sought out community of people who shared my values and created a community where I would be able to learn about my history and culture. I wanted to find people who would provide a space to learn about traditions and support my efforts in activism. Now, as I continue to attend Shabbat, the words that were once foreign to me have slowly become more familiar. The melodies of the songs bring me comfort, and I have become invested in the lives of the people I see on screen and in front of me today. I've recited the Morning's Kodesh alongside many of you while we've held space for a member who is grieving, and I've celebrated milestones with you as well. It brings me joy to hear everyone sharing stories about publishing books, seeing family for the first time, returning to Broadway shows, getting on a plane and finally being able to hug their child, and reuniting with grandchildren and chasing them around to the point of exhaustion. This community that you have created and have welcomed me into has become a part of my new normal, and one that I welcome and feel welcomed in and rejoice in. As I mentioned earlier, this is my first time celebrating the high holidays, which means that I've never even been to a service, so I literally have no frame of reference aside from what I've looked up online and YouTube. But I barely know what this holiday means to the Jewish community, let alone what it means to me. My understanding is that the holiday offers us the opportunity to ask forgiveness from ourselves and those we have wronged, and to vow to be active, involved, caring members of the community in the coming year. So I'll start with myself. I've lost sight of some of my agency this year. I may be angry, I may be tired, but I am not powerless. In the face of great losses and challenges, it can feel impossible to rebuild. Working through the pandemic and our broken healthcare system the last year has made that all the more apparent. Our increasing maternal death rates, specifically amongst Black women, the rising costs of pharmaceuticals, worrying about the cost of an ambulance in the middle of a medical emergency, and the fact that medical bankruptcy is even a phrase. None of this is normal, and it is not acceptable. But fixing our healthcare system doesn't start in the hospitals. It starts at the voting booth. Voting is the most powerful tool we as individuals have to hold our elected officials accountable. And we can see the consequences when they are restricted or made harder. In the 90s, Texas was ranked 14th in ease of voting. Now it's 50th. And as we stand here today, Texas elected officials have effectively outlawed abortion. And make no mistake, abortion is health care. If we're going to make our democracy work for us, we have to start with voting rights legislation and leading to civics and comprehensive, age-appropriate health education in the classrooms. We deserve lawmakers who believe in science and the right to bodily autonomy. As we celebrate this point in our democracy, we deserve a new beginning, one of our own collective choosing, wherein we have the opportunity to flourish. In this year, may we be guided by compassion, empathy, and dedication to the preservation of human dignity and self-determination in all that we do. And may we demand the same of our elected officials. Shana Tova.